Illinois at Urbana or go on to Duke and get an MBA or work on Wall Street for 15 years, had it not been for people like Michelle, people like Reverend Carey, people like Mel, but more importantly, Reverend obeying the call of God and allowing God to use him to allow Salem to come forth. So whenever I get a chance to actually share what I can, I'll do that. So let me say this. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit more about some practical ways that you can actually start beginning investing right now. Now, I'm going to say this in full disclosure. The thoughts and everything that I share are strictly my own. Okay. They are not by any way and means sanctioned by Salem. I am a registered investment advisor. You can go to brokercheck.com and look me up. You'll see my whole entire career from the time I worked at Morgan Stanley to the time I worked at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. And you know, if you need to do that, please, I invite you. So when I share things with you, this is my personal opinion. It's things that I'm sharing. One of the things that you always will hear is that, you know, you should always seek the advice of your financial advisor. And I'm going to say this and keep repeating this. Finance, you know, when it comes to our finances, when it comes to our investments, it's the only time where there is a specialist that's needed, but we find ourselves going into Facebook and asking people, what should I invest in, right? We find ourselves asking our cousin, mom and them, about stock tips, as opposed to actually asking a professional. And a lot of times, you know, I believe that that's rooted in a couple of things. Number one, we, as a community, we have a huge distrust for financial institutions, and rightfully so. The second thing is that, you know, financial institutions don't really make themselves available to us, right? So you think about the actual brick and mortar banks that exist typically where black and brown people live, right? And it's typically, you know, one if you're lucky. And so, you know, sometimes finding a professional becomes a challenge. And then if you do find a professional, it's like, well, you know, can I afford them? Is it in my right price point? So I just want to say at the very beginning that, again, I want to give you some things to kind of set you on the right way, set you on the right path. But ultimately, I think that, you know, you wanting to actually sit on this class and listen in, that's the best first step. So with no further ado, let's figure out where we're going tonight. So the road ahead for us is three things. Number one, we're going to talk about setting a goal, right? And then we're going to get into budget and flow, or budget and cash flows. And then we're going to talk about getting started. So last week, what we did was we talked about, you know, how to set yourself up for success and bounce forward with respect to your retirement, or, you know, your retirement savings, whether that be 401k or if you're self-funded in this environment, right? We talked about the ways that you can actually invest. We talked about the different tools. We talked about exchanges. We talked about the different vehicles in order to actually fund your retirement. So we talked about Social Security. We talked about 401ks. We talked about pension funds. And then we also talked about, towards the end, what are some of the do's and don'ts, right? That, you know, if you actually take out a loan against your 401k, that you have a certain time frame to actually pay that back. And then we kind of ended on a high note. We talked about some different strategies. So tonight, what we're going to really kind of do is bring it back to just good old investing, right? So not so much just investing on the sake of having an eye towards retirement, but hey, Sean, I'm kind of I'm new to this thing, and I want to actually start putting my money into the market, right? I want to actually start, you know, I want to commit to having at least $50 per week that I'm setting aside in order to do exactly what we talked about, creating a safety net, right? So we're going to get into that. Now, what you're going to find for me is that I'm very plain Jane. I am very vanilla, because I believe that investing for the sake of investing is foolishness, right? That the surefire way to to actually abuse the whole purpose of investing is not to understand why you're investing. So as you're investing, it has to have a goal. Money is tangible, right? And a lot of times when I'm talking to people and they say, well, I'm just investing and the market's up and the market's down, and you ask them, well, what does that mean to you? Well, it just means the market's up. And what happens is that at the very beginning, we have sort of this in our mind that I'm going to invest so that I can save towards improving my kitchen, right? I want to remodel my kitchen. I want to go on that great trip to the islands, right? I want to finally be able to put down for a new car. Those are tangible goals. And what you'll see is that I believe that when you have a goal and it's actually attached to an investment plan, it is so much easier for you to stay on track and to stay on task in terms of getting to that goal. So let's start off by talking about goals and why they're important. So my wife and I took a great trip to Italy in October 2018. And it was some of the best food I've ever eaten, not just some of the best Italian food, but some of the best food I've ever eaten. Gotten the chance to see some really great sculptures here and works of art by the artist Michelangelo. And he had this great quote. He said that the danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. A lot of people don't set goals because they don't want to be held accountable, right? There's an old saying that if your goals don't, if your goals and your dreams don't terrify you, they don't make you fearful, then you're not setting them high enough, right? So we have to set goals, and we have to set financial goals, right? So what is an actual goal? No matter how you define a goal, there's three ways to do it, right? There's three definitions from Webster. So it's a ends towards we're actually putting effort towards something. If you're a sports nut like me, you start talking about players in a game where you're trying to actually advance a ball, or in hockey, you're trying to advance the puck. Or if you're a runner in the marathon or a sprinter, it's a terminal point in a race, right? You know that you're trying to get from point A to point B, and point B being your goal. So what are the ingredients of a goal, right? So a goal has three things. It has a start date, an action plan, and a specific outcome. So let me say that again. A goal has three things: a start date, an action plan, and a specific outcome. If you don't have a goal that has these three things, what you have is a dream. And so you hear a lot of people say, I'm going to invest all this money in the market. I'm going to do this. I'm going to save for this. I'm going to say that. And it's like, okay, when are you going to start? What's your action plans behind it? And what's your specific outcome? Because, if your aim is nowhere, or your destination is nowhere, you'll succeed all the time, right? So all of our goals, regardless of these financial goals that we have, whether that's, saving or what have you, they have to have a start date. You have to have an action plan behind it. And there has to be a measurable outcome that you're designed to get to. So there are three types of financial goals, right? The first goal, I think we all can agree upon, there are needs, right? The needs are things that depend on your survival, right? Period. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs: shelter, food, and security, right? And so from that standpoint, whatever you need to actually get you through, that's a need. Now, wants actually are a little bit gray area, right? So it might be a need that I need to work out to be healthy, right? However, is it a need or a want that I want to go, that I have a membership at Equinox for $150 a month versus having a membership at Planet Fitness for $25 a month, right? So wants kind of get into the gray area. And then the last but not least is wishes, right? So something that you desire, but you can't obtain. So like, hey, I want to save up so that the next time they have one of those charity raffles to win a lunch with Oprah, I want to be able to buy it, right? That's a wish, right? So there are your three goals: needs, wants, wishes. Keep that in mind. So as we start moving forward, we start talking about evaluating priorities and alternatives, right? So the question is, do you have a financial goal, right? I never encourage anyone to actually start investing unless they have a financial goal. And you'll see why as we move on to the next section. But investing in of itself without a financial goal is a recipe for disaster. Okay. There are a lot of people who want to do day trading. In day trading, you can lose your money. You can lose all of your money, right? There is no warning signal that comes up that says that, hey, you can lose all your principal and interest should you invest in this stock that's going to go bankrupt. You just lose all your money, and that's that, right? So, do you have financial goals? Secondly, are these goals in the correct order, right? Talked about the order of importance: needs first, wants second, third, wishes, right? And what steps are you taking to accomplish your goals? And then last but not least, are there alternatives to your goals? And that's really important because, if you actually have a goal and necessarily you're just not, financially able to get there, are there other things that you can do in order to put you on track to get there, right? So for some of us, we just might have a little bit too much in credit card debt, right? So are there things that we can be doing to actually, tackle and head on that credit card debt in order so that we can save a little bit more, so that we can invest a little bit more, right? So the other important thing about having a goal is assessing your probability of actually achieving it, right? Once you've actually defined what your goals are, write them down, right? Write it down, make the vision plain. Commit to seeing your goal through to the very end. Be realistic about your chances of accomplishing your goal. And then also remember, the race is not given to the swift, but to he who endures, right? This is something that Michelle always said during new members graduation for those who actually hadn't finished yet, right? So look, there's not a race. There's never a perfect time for you to start getting invested in the market. Whenever you put your first dollar into the market, that is the perfect time. Because as we saw last week, the market has continually gone up, right? Case in point, we just saw, a lot of stocks in March hit 52-week lows. And that's just a nice way of saying, over the last year or so, they've hit their all-time, they hit the lowest point within a year. A lot of people said, well, that was the perfect time to invest in the market. Well, now we got a second wave of COVID going on, right? A second wave, and estimates have actually gone up. And now you're starting to see stocks across the board actually go down, right? So when is there a perfect time? There is no perfect time. You can't time the market. No one can beat the market. If I could beat the market, I would not be on this phone call. I would not be doing this presentation, right? So no one actually can, and that's a good thing. The best investors are long-term investors, and we'll talk about that as we get further on. So as we wrap up here, you want to monitor your progress. After you decide on the 3 key ingredients: your start date, your action plan, your specific outcome, monitor your progress, right? And whether you do that on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, just check in with yourself, and then also to be held accountable. Let other people know about your goals. People you trust, of course, right? Let your friends and family members that you actually trust, not those who are going to be in your business, but those you actually trust, so that they can hold you accountable. And then last but not least, do not beat yourself up if you do not hit your goals. Why? Because we all have goals that we want to achieve, and we don't hit it. But as long as you stay in the race, and as long as you stay committed to trying to achieve that goal, you have not failed. And the toughest thing is actually having a goal and actually saying, hey, look, this is what I'm going to commit to actually getting there, right? And then also to remember this, that what gets measured gets done. When you write down these goals and you actually say, hey, look, this is what we're going to do as a family. This is how we're going to tackle this. If once you measure it and actually put it on the refrigerator, put it on your mirror, in your bathroom or on your, on your dresser, you're looking at it, right? And every day you're like, hey, have I gotten a little bit closer? Am I a little bit further along in my progress? And that's how you actually achieve your goal. So with that said, we're now going to move into where kind of goals actually meet in terms of physical manifestation, right? The goal is the act of just writing it down and saying, hey, I want this to come to pass. The hard part is really the budgeting and the actual management of cash flows, right? So what we're going to start here is actually defining what a budget is. Now, I'm not going to read this verbatim, but what I will tell you is that a budget literally is just your personal balance sheet statement. So what is a balance sheet statement? Great question. So a balance sheet statement is basically a financial document that typically we associate with companies that says, okay, here's your assets, here's your liabilities, and here's your equity, right? So in order to actually say something is an asset, you need the ability to actually say, well, how did that asset get funded? If you buy a house, right? Unless you are a superstar or a pro basketball player or some type of professional player, chances are you're not going to pay cash for that house if you don't have the cash to do so. That's fine. So what are you going to do? You're going to take out a mortgage. A mortgage is a liability because you're saying I am going to pay back the bank over X amount of years for allowing me to have this cash to buy my house. Now I've actually gotten the cash from the bank, which has become a liability in order to buy my house, right? So my assets actually match up to my liability. That's all the balance sheet is, right? What are your liabilities? What are your assets, right? So in order to actually create a budget, we really need to get a handle on what's going on, right? And when I talk to a lot of people who say, I have trouble investing, I always ask them, how are you doing in terms of saving, right? Because if you ask them like, hey, in terms of financial education, where are you? I have the desire to learn. Okay, great. Where are you in terms of actual saving and investing? Well, I'm just starting to get started with that. Okay, how's your budget? Because what we consistently find, or what I consistently find, is this: individuals who say, I want to start saving and investing, who don't have a budget, when calamity strikes, what's the first thing that happens? We empty out whatever saving or investing that we have to that point. And look, things happen. But the question is that once you have a budget in place, it allows you the freedom to actually kind of go forward in your plan. And I'll be able to talk to you a little bit about that, but let's talk about how do you actually create a budget, right? So a budget really consists of your after-tax income. That's your cash flow, right? So when you start talking about, going back to my corporate example, we look at revenues minus expenses equal your profit, right? So your bottom line is your profit, right? What is remaining at the end of the month after you've gotten every type of possible cash flow, whether that be from some inheritance, whether that be from your 9 to 5, whatever's coming in, that's your cash flow, right? And then trying to actually track, what's your outflow, right? So when we start talking about choose a budgeting plan, we start talking about, okay, here are the things that we absolutely need to pay for versus the things that we kind of want, right? So how much is going to go out? And then how much am I going to be left with at the end of the month or at the end of the year? And then third but not least, you got to track your progress. This goes back to monitoring. Fourth thing is that you should automate your savings. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the fifth thing is that moderate, revisit your budget. If you're not hitting it, make sure that you're doing the digging to figure out, okay, hey, what's going on, right? I hit it for June and February, but come March and April, things fell off the track. Now, this year has been a little bit special, so we're not going to really kind of go into that. But in a normal course of year, trying to figure out, hey, what's going right and what's going wrong. So this is a sample of a budget. This is a nice template, right? And remember, I told you that there were 3 financial goals, that there are needs, wants, and wishes, right? So here is a template of 50, 30, 20, right? The 50% of this person's budget is going towards their needs. What's a need? Grocery, housing, utilities, transportation, minimum loan payments for your credit card and debt that you have, right? As well as childcare. So what goes to wants, right? 30% of your income for wants. Now, again, this is just a template. This is a 50, 30, 20 template. 30% of that, their income is going out for wants such as eating out, gifts, travel, and entertainment, right? And then 20% of their remaining budget, or what's left over, is going to go to savings. Now, you notice that I never said anything about wishes, because in the big bold letters below, wishes don't get funded. Why? Because wishes are for kids. When you wish upon a star, doesn't matter who you are, I'm not going to butcher up the song, wishes don't get funded, okay? It's good to account for needs and good to account for wants, right? But at some point with the remaining portion of your budget, you have to save. And here's the thing, is that when we don't save, what we set ourselves up is for depression, for just self-loathing, and it becomes a vicious cycle. Because why? No one wants to work their butt off week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out, and not be able to actually see any progress. If you're not saving and putting something away for yourself with some specific purpose, I promise you're going to burn yourself out. By actually having a budget, which will allow you to say, hey, 20% of my income, come rain or shine, that's what I'm saving and putting away. Now, when you actually commit to this 20%, that's when you say, okay, that's where my room for investment, that's where it's going to go to, right? So let's say that, I made $1,000 at the end of 2 weeks, right? So I know that $500 is going to go to my needs, right? That $300 is going to go to my wants, right? And then the remaining $200, I'm going to actually use that to start investing and saving, right? And why do we do this? Because when we set down a budget is not restrictive. It actually gives you the freedom to do more things, right? It gives you the freedom to actually say no, right? Because how can I've determined that I'm not going to touch my 401k. I'm going to leave that alone. But you know what? I'm going to start building up this safety net that Sean talked about. So I'm going to save 20% of my check every 2 weeks to start building up this fund, because if something happens, I got to make sure that me and my household, that we're okay, right? And then when something comes up that is not in your purview, something that you hadn't planned for, it's okay to say no, right? But this 20%, or however you determine, again, this is just a sample budget, the bare minimum that you should save every paycheck or every month should be 10% of your income, right? So you can do things like tithes. So you can do things like invest in the market, right? These are things that are going to give you that freedom, so that if things come up, you have already budgeted in, you've already kind of seen, hey, this is what I can do and this is what I can't do. Because individuals, mark my words, individuals who do not have the capacity to say, okay, here's what I'm budgeting for, here's what I'm investing for, are really doomed to liquidate their investment accounts should something come up that they weren't expecting. When you budget, that is the hardest part. The investment part, literally, I'm going to say this again and again, the investment part is easy. If you're a long-term investor and you are investing in companies that you actually frequent, that you support, that you believe in, and you are okay with investing in those companies for the next 7 to 10 years, that's the easy part. right? The hard part is like, okay, how are you going to actually set aside X amount of income on a regular basis to continue to start building and saving so that you can grow that investment, that investment strategy of your financial health, right? So the last thing here that I'll show you is just a sample budget plan. What I would highly encourage everyone to do if you have not done so already is to go to mint.com, mint.com. Mint is not perfect, but the one thing I like about Mint is that no matter where you bank, if you bank at Chase, if you bank at Bank of America, if you bank at Harris, right? Harris BMO, if you bank at any of these institutions and you go to Mint and you type in your accounts, you type in your credit card, whatever bills you have, Mint will actually list out everything that you have and you'll be able to see it in one fell swoop, right? So it's one of the best tools that you can have because why? It's going to be able to show you what are your inflows. It's going to be able to show you your outflows. And then ultimately you're going to be able to actually see sort of, hey, okay, all right, I need to start setting a budget. I can actually do a 60-20 budget, right? 60% of my needs, 20% of my wants, 20% of my saving. Or I can do a 50, 20, 30, right? However it is, you get to make that decision. But as I said, when you are able to actually set up a budget, it makes your investing prowess and your ability to save so much easier. So many times I've seen people say, Sean, I want to save and invest. And immediately, as I said, if you do not have a budget, what's going to happen is that when those unexpected things come up, we're going to probably liquidate that saving and investment account and we have to start all over again. So make it easier for yourself. So now we actually get to the really good and juicy part. Now, there are so many things that actually go into a good portfolio or investing. Tonight, we're really just going to focus on the stock market. And as I said before, I'll share with you sort of my personal thoughts. And again, these are my personal thoughts, not officially backed by Salem. And it will hopefully trigger you to start thinking about, hey, what do I actually like, right? What are the things that I think are good opportunities to invest in? Remember, if you are investing, hoping to take your $10 and turn it into $10,000 in 2 weeks, that's not investing. That's speculation, right? That's gambling, right? And you can save yourself the time and frustration and just go to the riverboat. I promise you, you might have a little bit more fun, or once COVID passes, or maybe they put up the plastic screens. But I'm telling you that investing is not the same as gambling, right? Well, Sean, you take risks and you take all this. Yeah, I get that, right? But here's the thing, when you're talking about investment strategies, I always think about like, is this something I would recommend for my grandma? Right? I'm talking to my grandmother, would I tell her to open up an account so she can start day trading? Would I put her into derivatives? Would I tell her to actually create a buy right strategy or something like that, right? So again, I can go there, but I choose to keep it very simple because why? It doesn't take all that, right? When you're talking about investing for your personal savings and your personal financial wealth, you and I will never beat Wall Street. We just won't do it. We don't have enough capital, right? There are high frequency traders out there who literally make money off of fractions of pennies because they're trading every second. And the one thing too is that you're constantly trading, you're constantly selling and buying stocks. What happens is that you have friction costs. And true, there are some places that don't charge commission, but they actually charge, an annual fee, right? And the other thing too is that, it opens up to so many other anxiety issues. So again, I'm a long-term investor. And if you've seen anyone who is a long-term investor, like a Warren Buffett, they will tell you that's the surest way because it takes away from all of this guesswork. And it really forces you to actually say, I'm going to invest in companies I believe in. So with no further ado, let's hop right into this picture right here, right? So on the left, the young lady holding up a John Hancock banner versus the young lady on the right holding up the Jamaican flag. The young lady on the right holding up the Jamaican flag, she won a sprint at the Doha competition in 2019. The young lady on the left won the Boston Marathon. Why do I show these pictures? Is because investing is a marathon, not a sprint. I'm going to say that again. Investing is a marathon and not a sprint. Why is investing a marathon and not a sprint? Because there are consequences. I told you that there are that there are actual consequences for churning. That's a terminology within the industry that talks about how, and it's really used in a derogatory sense, how financial advisors will actually keep putting ideas in front of you to say, hey, we bought Sprint last week, and Sprint is about to merge with T-Mobile, right? So let's buy AT&T today. Okay, great. And then call you up tomorrow next week and say, hey, we got out of AT&T. We're in AT&T. We got out of Sprint and T-Mobile. Hey, why don't we sell AT&T and let's put us in Verizon, right? And it's like, okay, it doesn't sound too bad, but every week, every month, right? And all they're doing literally is they're getting a commission, and that's called churning, right? So what you see is you start to see your balances come down and down inch by inch, and their commission go up and up, right? So again, that's churning. You want to be a buy and hold investor. The second reason why you want to be a buy and hold investor, apart from the fees, is the fact that there are tax consequences. I shared this slide with you guys last week. If you are an investor and you sell, if you buy a stock and you don't hold on to that stock for longer than 12 months, that can be viewed as an ordinary income event. And you can be taxed as little 10% or up to as much as 37%. But if you hold on to your investment for 12 months or more, you actually pay capital gains on that tax, on that event. So let's say that you buy a share of Amazon at $1,000, and Amazon goes up to $2,000. You made $1,000. Awesome. Now, if you sell you sell your Amazon gain, right? You sell the stock in order to lock in your gain of $1,000. If you do that after 12 months, you'll pay 20% on that $1,000. So the most that you can pay is $200 on that $1,000 gain. However, if you sell that stock prior to 12 months, and let's say you're in the upper bracket of 37%, now you're going to pay an additional $170 on that profit, right? So it's not just about, is your investment going up and down, but also too, when are you going to realize the gain? Because, the one thing about investing in stocks, these are what they call is an unrealized gain or loss. You can't realize it until you actually sell it. And when you sell it, that's when you actually have to start thinking about these consequences, right? So buy and hold investors do a couple of things. They don't pay as much in terms of commissions or fees. And then the other thing too is they pay lower taxes because, again, when you're buying and holding, the tax consequences are more favorable to you. So before we jump in and start talking a little bit more about different stocks, what I want to talk to you about is what kind of investor are you, right? So there's three types of investors. There are conservative investors, right? Conservative investors, they don't like a lot of volatility and risk, right? So typically when I ask somebody, hey, what type of investor are you? And they're just like, don't lose my money. That's a conservative investor. That type of person usually likes to be invested in bonds, or fixed income is another name for it, money markets, and some large cap. And I know you're asking, what's a large cap? Stay with me, I'll explain it in a few seconds. The second thing is that There are aggressive investors, right? Now, if conservative investors are over here, aggressive investors are way over here, right? They're on the opposite side of the spectrum. They're like, red and blue, just they don't get along, right? So aggressive investors are willing to take on more risk and more volatility, right? So if aggressive investors over here and conservative investors over here, and they don't get along, red state, blue state, right? Moderate investors are purple. They're in the middle because sometimes they feel like taking on risk and sometimes they really don't, right? But either way, they're not going to go to the extreme. And their investment portfolios kind of look like as someone who invests in mid cap, small cap, bonds, money markets, and alternative investments. They're all over the place. Whereas somebody who's an aggressive investor, they're investing in fixed income, alternative investments, small caps, mid caps, and their investment portfolio literally is trying to hit it out the box, right? So when we start talking about large cap and small cap and mid cap, I'll be able to share that with you on the next slide. But let's take a step back and let's talk about different asset classes, right? So equities are an asset class. There are many asset classes. Last week we talked about equities. That's one. We talked about fixed income. That's two, right? The other two main ones are cash equivalent, which are money markets. So somebody asked me the question about CDs. CDs would be cash equivalent because they're typically sponsored and backed by the FDIC. And so there's no real way for you to lose your money, and they're very liquid, right? So those are cash equivalents. The last thing is alternative investments. Now, alternative investments are really speculative. Let me say that again. Alternative investments are very speculative. And why am I saying that? Because if you look at everything that alternative investments, everything that falls under the alternative investments here, you can lose your money really quickly, right? That's real estate, that's commodities, that's futures, that's options, that's cryptocurrencies. Why is that? Because alternative investments by nature are not as transparent, meaning that the pricing is not readily available. They are typically illiquid, meaning if you can actually buy a share of AT&T stock today, right? It usually is going to take about 2 to 3 days for it to actually hit your account. Let's say you turn around on Tuesday next week and say, I want to get out of it. You can get out of it, right? There's going to be a buyer, there's going to be a seller somewhere. Usually with alternative investments, they are liquid because you got to spend some time trying to find a buyer, right? And it's not really that easy. Case in point, houses don't just move in 2 to 3 days. They're illiquid, right? Same thing with real estate. And the same thing with these other forms of alternative investment. So that's something you got to be careful of. And if we had time, we would go through it, but we're really just going to kind of keep it on focus on stocks. So we talked about this before in terms of what a stock is. The stock represents ownership in a company. Companies divide their ownership stakes into shares. So whenever you actually buy a share of a stock, you're buying a percentage into a company, right? And when we said this last week that stocks are actually purchased for appreciation and bonds are purchased for protection, right? And that the way that we figure out, hey, what is this company's value? It really depends on a couple of things. The price actually depends on the number of possible shares that are outstanding for purchase, right? Versus times the actual price. That actually is what they call the market capitalization. So give you a quick story. You ever wonder why, somebody just doesn't, like, for example, we know that Amazon has surpassed Walmart in terms of dominance in retail. Well, you say, well, why doesn't Walmart just go out and try to buy up a couple of companies in order to compete with Amazon? That's a good point, right? However, if they actually went out and bought Shopify and try to do a merger with Microsoft, because the components of Amazon aren't just retail. They actually do a lot of things in terms of technology, in terms of selling servers, right? So in order for Walmart to compete head to head, they would need to do all these things. But, Walmart doesn't just go to Microsoft to actually acquire them or buy them, because, they're not, Microsoft is actually owned by institutional investors. We talked about how institutional investors are actually serviced by funds like Vanguard, Fidelity, right? And also they put together mutual funds. So in order to actually buy a large company, what typically happens is that you have to go through so many back channels and so many different variations in order to buy up little shares here and there before the price actually goes up and people figure out what you're doing. It's really hard to do, is the whole point of the story. But we look at market cap and we look at the actual price of the stock and what's available for purchase, because it might be actually impossible to buy a company outright in the market because they only have X amount of their company that's available for sale. And then last but not least, a company will actually pay a dividend if it's mature. So there are three different stock classes. And remember, I told you, I'll explain what large cap is and mid cap is. So large cap stocks are issued by companies with a market cap. And we talked about market capitalization. So again, market capitalization is taking the price of the actual stock where it's traded, the number of shares that are available, right? When you multiply that, then you say, okay, this company has a market cap of X number. So large caps are companies that have a market cap of 10 billion or more. Coca-Cola, Amazon, Microsoft, Nike, right? Dow. These are companies, Disney, these are companies that have a market cap of 10 billion or more, right? When we start talking about mid cap and small cap, these are companies that are publicly traded, but they don't have a really high enough market cap. So a mid cap stock is a company that has anywhere between 2 to 10 billion. And these are like kind of regional companies, companies that are only based solely in the Midwest or only based in Illinois, but they're publicly traded, right? And then we talk about small cap stocks. Small cap stocks are companies that are just now getting going, or potentially they might have been really big. And there's a terminology for them called fallen angels, where they've actually been really big at one point, and through turnover, through executives leaving, or just bad business, bad just kind of business environment, they have actually seen situations where they've actually had to let go and sell assets, and they've actually come down, right? So those are the three main subclasses. The other subclasses are international. So these are stocks that you can buy that are actually operated in other countries like Zara, H&M, right? The BP, which actually stands for British Petroleum. They bought Amoco. They are based in London, right? And then you have emerging markets. Now, emerging markets are actually as speculative as alternative investment. So remember, I talked to you about alternative investments because when we start talking about what type of investor are you, if you're aggressive, you are looking for high return, right? And high return means high risk. And so emerging markets provide that opportunity, and they're very much very similar to alternative investments. So when we say emerging markets, we're talking about other geographical areas within the world that aren't developed, like Brazil. Brazil is an emerging market. Argentina is an emerging market, right? And you talk about Russia and China. These are emerging markets. They're not quite yet where the U.S., where France and Germany are, but they're on their way. And so there's an opportunity for you to actually invest in to get there. The next thing that I want to talk about is different stock sectors, right? And so different stock sectors was really a way for us to actually look at the different business categories, right? So there are 11 sectors. Now, stay with me. You don't have to remember all these sectors, but what I want to do is help you understand how the market is broken down, right? So there are 11 sectors. The first sector is materials, right? When we start talking about materials, we're talking about producers who are literally going into mines, right? Rio Tinto is one of the biggest miners of precious metals, right? Vale is a competitor of Rio Tinto. Industrials. Start talking about industrials. These are names that should be familiar. General Electric, Caterpillar, based out of Peoria, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, which is also headquartered in Chicago, right? The next sector is financials. Plain and simple, Bank of America, Visa, PayPal. These are all examples of financial companies. Second, the next sector is energy. Straightforward, energy, ExxonMobil, Schlumberger, Kinder Morgan, and Halliburton. Now, don't be alarmed if the last three you don't remember. Bottom line is that you have ExxonMobil, which is synonymous with oil exploration and drilling. Then you have companies like Kinder Morgan, Schlumberger, and Halliburton, where literally they're just servicing the oil fields and servicing ExxonMobil. That's how they exist, right? They're not out there trying to actually buy up oil fields for discovery. It's like once they've been discovered, they're going to service that area. The next area, which is really big, consumer discretionary, right? This is when we start talking about date night, taking the kids for that spring break or for summer break, right? So that's Carnival Cruise Line, Grubhub or Postmates, right? When you order delivery food, Lululemon, Party City, right? Next area, information technology, very straightforward. Communication services, which is a little bit different from information technology because when you start talking about Verizon, Facebook, Disney, and Comcast, we're talking about media, right? So information technology really is about kind of, okay, what hardware, what software are you going to use? And then communication services is, okay, what content are we going to actually utilize and after we figure out what hardware we're going to choose. Last four, real estate, healthcare, very straightforward. Consumer staples is a little bit weird because you start talking about Pepsi, Colgate, Procter and Gamble, and Target. So basically those things that we absolutely need, right? So consumer discretionary. Do we need to go on vacation this year? Do I need to order out? Maybe, maybe not, right? Consumer staple, I need to have a Pepsi. I need toilet paper. I need paper towels, right? So that's consumer staples. And last but not least, utilities. When we start thinking about somebody like Exelon, formerly Commonwealth Edison, that's a great example of that. So these are the number of different sectors that we have. And then this is how it's actually broken down. So I'm going to actually kind of buzz through this portion because we touched on it last week, right? So there are three major stock indexes, the S&P 500, which captures the top 500 companies in the United States. If that's too big, you can use the Dow Jones, which captures the top 30 companies within the United States. These names should be familiar. And then last but not least, NASDAQ. Remember, we talked about NASDAQ being an index as well as a marketplace where the top technology companies are traded, right? So Facebook and Apple aren't listed on the New York Stock Exchange. They're listed on the NASDAQ. And then as we get ready to close, let's talk about some meat and potato ways for you to actually start investing, okay? So what we have here is self-directed versus directed. And this is so important, so please hear me out. So self-directed investing allows you the ability to actually, start investing right away, right? Meaning that you don't need to wait for somebody to actually say, hey, here's a good idea, here's this, here's that. Like literally it's like, okay, I want to buy SPY. I want to buy spiders. I want to buy the S&P 500. Let's go, right? So the pros of self-directing investing are it's easy to open an account. You can do individual stock selections, real-time information, and zero commissions depending on what platform. The cons are you get no assistance, no assistance, okay? And if you have no assistance, that means you can lose all your money. So the typical platforms that you have are Ameritrade, Charles Schwab, Doe, and Robinhood. Now, Ameritrade, TD Ameritrade and Charles Schwab, they do have options where you can get some assistance, but there is no assistance on Robinhood. If you decide to actually open up an account as soon as we get off and actually go and buy Ford, right? And something I would not, I'm not saying that you should do, but you go and buy Ford because you say it's looking cheap at $6 a share. What does cheap really mean? What is it, what does that actually mean? You can lose all your money if it goes to zero, period. Directed investing is a little bit different because there are some, I'm not that good at bowling. So sometimes I have to put the little kitty bumpers up, right? So directed investor, that has the kitty bumpers so that your ball doesn't go into the gutter, right? So the pros are it's easy to open accounts. They have investment strategies built around risk tolerance. Remember, we talked about risk. What type of investor are you? Are you risky? Are you aggressive? Are you conservative? Or are you kind of somewhere in between, right? And then they have affinity fund options, meaning that I only want to invest in companies that are doing what right by the economy. I only want to invest in companies that have some type of positive female image or an actual female executive, right? There's ways for you to do that. The cons with this is that there probably is a minimum commission or a minimum fee that you actually might pay in order to utilize these services. And some of them actually have higher minimums, with the exception of Acorns and Stash, because with Acorns and Stash, you can be invested with as little as $5 a share. As I get ready to take questions, I want to say this. There's a couple of periodicals and things that you probably should have in your arsenal. Number one, you should use Investopedia.com. It's a great website to go to and just really kind of walk you through some of the basics. Another good site is Nerd Wallet. And then let me say this in terms of my personal views in the market. My personal views in the market are this, that things that I like and things that I'm invested in are companies I believe in, right? So if I don't have it in my home or if I've never used it, I'm not going to buy it. And so one of the things that I really kind of like right now as an idea and as a strategy are things like consumer staples, right? As well as consumer discretionary. Now, consumer discretionary has gotten hit. Carnival got hit really hard because why? Travel has been slashed because of coronavirus, right? Now, does that mean that Carnival is a bad company? Probably not, right? Does that mean that Carnival is going to come back after we have a vaccine for COVID? Possibly, right? So when you're thinking about if you're setting yourself up to invest individually, these are things that you want to think about. But regardless of what you're thinking about in terms of investing, it should be in a situation of where you are a user of that product or that company, you believe in their strategy, and you know something about it, and you're willing to actually invest in it for 7 to 10 years. If you're not willing to do that, going into a Facebook chat and saying, who has a hot stock tip or what are people investing in? Why would you do that? Because you worked too hard for your money, and honestly, it'd be better for you to go to the riverboat and put your money down on red, because investing takes some time. Invest in companies that you believe in, invest in stories that you believe in, right? If you believe that some of these consumer discretionary stocks have gotten really hammered, such as Carnival, Royal Cruise Line, and that they're going to come back once we get to normal, and you're willing to hold on to them for the next 6 months to a year, absolutely. right? And if you think that, hey, work from home is something that's really interesting, looking at work from home stocks like Zoom, like Peloton, those are things that really intrigue you. Do some homework, do some research, right? But the bottom line is the takeaway I want to take, I want to leave you with this as we open up for questions, is that no two investors are going to invest the same. Everyone is going to invest based upon their own personal experience and their thoughts, and that's how it should be. And the one thing I will tell you is that investing is the easy part. We can all find companies that we use day to day, day in and day out. The hard part is the budgeting to free you up to actually say, how much can I invest on a regular basis so that I can start to build and accumulate wealth. Thank you, and I'll stop there.
Sean, I think you have a question in the chat. Did you touch on drips and was it Ritz or prison?
Yeah, so drips or REITs or prison REITs. So REITs are going to be very much like an alternative investment. And what you're doing there is literally companies like KKR, I'm whiffing on a couple of other names. What they're doing is that it's a real estate investment trust. And so if you want exposure to real estate without necessarily going into Inglewood, going into Chatham and trying to actually buy up a piece of property, you can actually invest in these real estate investment trusts, right? So one of the things that I would suggest that you do a little bit of homework on them, because the thing about it is that when you start talking about real estate investment trusts, because of work from home, and then you have companies like Facebook, Twitter, basically saying, hey, look, we're looking to move our people out of offices, they actually might start leading the way for these traditional companies. And so the question now becomes at this: if I buy a real estate investment trust right now, is it fully priced in that corporate America is probably going to be on the hook for all of this real estate that they're leasing, that they've signed up, right? And so if after the vaccination takes place and utilization in downtown Chicago keeps going down, real estate investment trust may not be a good thing. Now, somebody mentioned prison REITs. I would not invest in prison REITs because just my conscience won't allow me. But the other thing too is that from a practical standpoint, in terms of a prison REIT, where we actually see with Black Lives Matter, where we actually see with positive and actual people going out and speaking out against systemic racism, right? So let's think about this. Private prison systems trade on the open market. That's the reason why their valuations have actually gone sky high. It's been on the backs of Black and brown men and women. So if there's going to be fundamental change, who's going to actually stand to lose the most money? It probably would be a prison REIT.
Hi, Sean. Good evening. Thanks for the great information that you shared tonight. Very informative. My issue is for quite some time, I've always wanted to invest, but I don't know how to quite get started or the right direction. Is it something that you can, advise me or how to just get it started? I know I have to do research and things like that, but again, it's just a matter of how to get rolling and, you don't want to invest in the wrong thing, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So what I would say to everyone, and Pamela, feel free to email me, Sean at Loop Investing, and I'll answer your drips question offline. So getting started, what I would say is this, right? You can't go wrong investing in the market itself, right? So some exposure in the market is better than no exposure. Um, I always say this, that we as Black people do not have the luxury of saying, I don't like to invest. I'm just going to save, right? Because whatever Chase decides to pay us in terms of a measly interest for our savings, our money, because we have so few opportunities to actually get a check versus our other counterparts, we got to make sure our money is working overtime, right? If we're going to work overtime and work 2 jobs, our money has to work overtime. So
Right.
you can't just have your money sitting in the mattress or sitting in a checking account or savings account earning you nothing. So at least at the very beginning, bare minimum, you know, buy an ETF, right? Buy an ETF in the market. There are a couple of ETFs out there that actually will track the market. And I would say this to anybody because this is just practical information. So if you want to invest in the S&P 500, there's an ETF called SPY, Spiders, right? If you want to invest in the Dow Jones, there's an ETF called DJI, right? You can invest in that, as well as you can invest in NASDAQ. If you want to say, hey, look, I think that the technology sector is going to go up. I want to invest in that. You can invest in QQQ, right? So what I want to say is that those are really some real practical ways to get exposure. The reason why I like ETFs for any beginning investor is that number one, mutual funds typically aren't something that you can do on your own. You typically need an advisor. So you're going to pay an advisor fee, regardless if you go to Morgan Stanley or if you go to Prime America, you're going to be paying somebody somewhere some money. And if you actually get a mutual fund, what we talked about last week is that active investment. You're paying a portfolio manager to manage that mutual fund, right? At least with ETFs, they're actually traded on the stock exchange. You see the transparency, you can, they're liquid, you can actually get out of it, and you're not paying a whole bunch of management fees. And they're the closest way for you to actually get exposure to the New York Stock Exchange or the Dow Jones Industrial Average versus trying to put everything together yourself. So for a lot of people, they say, hey, Sean, look, I really like Apple and I really like Facebook, but I don't got that type of money to buy the individual stock. You can buy the ETF because they're more price friendly.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And then also too, what I would suggest is that, like I said, you got self-directed versus directed. Anybody who says, I'm only going to buy into ETFs and I just want my money to be invested in the market and I'm going to be conservative, I have no problem with them going to Robinhood to only invest in those ETFs. It's really when you start going down the rabbit hole and investing in companies and stocks that you haven't done the research and you bought it because mom and them, cousin, somebody somewhere told you that, they're going to go public in a couple of days. That's when people get hurt and they get into trouble.
Just one last question. Is it a site or anything that I can go and start researching these things, or just I can just search ETF?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So
Okay.
Yahoo Finance is a great website.
Okay.
You can definitely do research there. And another cool website is CNBC, and you can actually get real-time prices, because that's the other thing too, is that with CNBC, not so, I don't think so for much for Yahoo, but at least with CNBC, you can actually see the real-time price. And why is that important? Because it's a 20-minute delay for other sites, right? So you kind of want to put a patchwork together. So CNBC, Yahoo Finance, and what am I thinking? Investopedia. Those are definitely some resources that everybody needs to have in their arsenal.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
John, you had another question regarding your thoughts on penny stocks and your thoughts on hopping on a stock once an acquisition has happened.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so Michelle has been really humble in terms of my background, so I'm gonna jump all over the Lululemon and Mirror. I'm gonna act a fool on this one. So what happens is, what happens with when a company announces an acquisition, okay? So today, Mirror is going to get acquired by Lululemon for $500 million, okay? So that's already built in. So what happens is that as the close date gets closer and closer, you'll actually see Mirror start trading and fluctuating all types of which way, right? And so what happens is that you have people who are betting and speculating that there's going to be somebody else come from left field to say 500 million ain't the price, right? Somebody will come in and say 600 million is the price, 700 million is the price, right? So they're really hoping that price gets bid up, right? Now, you could actually lose a lot of money on that, right? Because if Lululemon actually says, we're not going to play these games, right? And they actually pull their offer, then Mirror is actually left high and dry. And so it could get really funky really fast. And my thesis, my takeaway is, no, you shouldn't play those games. Like, you should not play those games at all. If you like Lululemon, they make you feel good, they empower you. You like the way you look at them, right? Buy the company because of that, right? Don't try to play these games where you're trying to figure out if the actual announced acquisition price is going to hold as the final price, because you can get hurt. And same thing with penny stocks. I would never invest. Like I said, my personal motto is this: if I can't explain it to my grandmother and I can't put her money in it, I'm not going to do it. So penny stocks are a sure way for me to actually say, hey, grandma, I don't love you. Give me your last $200 and let's just hope something happens, right? So penny stocks are a lottery ticket. And listen, there's some scratch offs out there that give you a higher rate of return. I know I'm not supposed to say this on Salem, but there's some scratch offs out there, some lottery tickets that give you a little bit more money than penny stocks, because they're penny stocks for a reason.
Anyone else with a question? Sean, you have been a blessing to us. We thank you so much. I think we'll all be making wiser decisions as a result of what you have shared with us. And I have it already set up. I'm sending out the PowerPoints to everybody tonight. So look in your email. You'll get lesson 1 and 2. And probably a video clip from tonight as well. And so we're looking forward to hopefully you coming back in the fall to give us some more help. And next week we're going to be dealing with businesses. And we have a tremendous teacher who will be with us for the next 2 weeks. Just an amazing young woman. So, Sean, we thank you so much and we love you. You all give Sean some love. You all unmute.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for those websites too. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for
very
all
much.
of your
Thank you
help.
so much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sean.
So we want to close out in prayer and actually lift up Sean and his wife and son, and along with you all. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for using this amazing young man to be a blessing to us, God. Father, we pray for his wife and for his son. We pray for him, God, that you'll continue to use them in a powerful way. We pray for the success of their son as he goes away to college, God. Father, I remember when Sean was going away to college. And so, Father, we thank you for all that you continue to do and how you are using this young man of color to be a blessing in a tremendous way in an industry that doesn't always lend itself to our people, God. And so we thank you, Father, for all that you've invested in him so that he can invest back into others. Father, I pray for every person that has been in this class. I pray, Father, that you would bless them abundantly. I pray, Father, that you would help us as a result of this class to make some wise investments. God, be glorified in every way. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
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 Love you all.
Good night, everyone.
Yes, love you all
Amen.
too.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Bye.
Thank you. See you next week.